All right, we're in Jeremiah chapter 9, the second part. We've been like trying to get through Jeremiah 9 for a really long time. And finally, I think I kind of realized why it was necessary to pause. One, I'm pausing for Passover, right? We're in our first feast of our new year. So I think we need time to reflect. I think the concepts that we're going to talk about today and where our hearts are and where we should be through this process are very much prepared for what we're going to hear, see in our mind's eye, and experience throughout this process. I believe that is definitely where we are. So just kind of to recap, going back from Jeremiah 1, kind of all the way through, we know that Jerusalem is in trouble. They have entered into a state of spiritual atrophy where they're like children where when you pop them, they don't respond. And they have entered into tons of practices that they have no business being in, and their heart disposition is that of, we know, but this is what we doing. That's pretty much where their hearts are. And so Yah has tried to appeal to them on several ends, obviously as their creator. He's appealed as a husbandman, and now he's just giving what's going to happen. Because you do not want to know me, because this is what you want to do, here is what the end result is going to be. And if you're anything like me, I feel like I operate a lot better when I know the end result. It keeps me from doing the actual things. If a person told you, hey, if you walk around that corner, you're going to get shot. Like every person who's walked around that corner literally gets shot. Me, I'm just not going to walk around the corner. But then there's some of us who go, well, did they get shot in the arm? Did they get shot with a BB gun? Did they get shot with a paintball gun? I'm like, but they got shot. Like, I don't really want to figure it out personally. Like, well, did they die? Like, I don't want to get shot. And so you have the disposition, unfortunately, in our people that tends to test. And Yah is literally saying, if you continue down this path, this is what's going to happen. Not maybe, not kinda, not you've never seen this before. You literally get examples of things that have happened to other people in your family who this has happened to, and yet you still proceed down this path. So today we're going to look at Yah's appeal through Jeremiah. Jeremiah opened up in our first part where he says, oh, that my eyes were a fountain of waters so that they could flow continually for the daughter of my people. Remember that? I cannot get that out of my head. So this week, as we go into it, we learned how to look at and how to, last week, the last time, we looked at how to judge or how to look at the people in our space who are influencing us. And that really understanding the emotional intelligence of Torah. Well, this is just literally a continuation of that, but now it deals with the emotions and the expression of the emotions and how our people understood the necessity of it. And it was literally put in place to get them to reactivate what trauma had literally completely atrophied, meaning like muscle atrophy is like if you sit too long, or if you say you end up in a wheelchair for a prolonged period of time, your muscles begin to deteriorate and you will lose your ability to walk, even though you mentally understand the kinesthetics behind walking. The muscles and the body will not be able to respond because they haven't been worked. Well, spiritually, Judah and Jerusalem, they had not worked their relationship with Yah. And so we'll see these wailing women as a reactivation of this spiritual atrophy and an attempt to get them to align back with where they were. So we're going to pick it up, Jeremiah chapter 8. We're going to move through Jeremiah chapter 8. We're going to spend some significant time right around Jeremiah, like the teens and then the 20s. And then it's going to wrap up pretty quickly because I didn't come to play any games at the end of this. And that's kind of how we're going to continue with it. I am going to give you some additional reading. I think it's really important to always highlight and see how other people interpret things. And as we know, in sharing things, this is not me saying, and everything that this person says is amazing, so go eat up everything they say. I'm going to share some information by a particular woman, and she does a lot. She's a I'm going to say like this, she's an African-American woman. She's not an awakened Hebrew in no stretch of the imagination, but she, in her scholarship, shared something very significant about the African-American experience and how we have viewed wailing over the years and tied it back into scripture. So I am going to share that. I'll share with you who she is, but that's not my stamp of endorsement. So just letting you guys know, and I'll probably say that again before I read it. So everybody has a clear picture on that. All right, let's go and get into the text, because that's what we're here for. All right, now let's just find it. There we go. All right, so I'm sharing my screen. We're going to start off right around Jeremiah chapter 8. So where we ended off with last time was Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 7, moving into Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 8. And we were talking about what Yah would do for the daughter of his people. And so the continuation of this thought, literally it continues, but I like to point out that this colon is giving you like this saying or information. And I said this, and I don't know if I said it in this space or not, but I said, wouldn't it be so cool if all of the times where it says, thus saith Yah, or we know Yah speaking, it was in red, like it is in the Brit Kadashah? Wouldn't that be so cool? Because then it wouldn't be, oh, that was Jeremiah talking, or that was the law that Moses gave. So I want you guys in your sanctified imagination to, as we go through this, start to view what Yah says, or when Yah speaks in red, as something that is in, like I was going to say, it can't be moved. It can't be changed. It can't be transferred. And it's very much in stone. It's not transferable. He means what he says. And as you begin to do that, you're going to see a shift in how we begin to view what Yah is saying. And I'm going to pose some questions, and they're rhetorical questions. We'll answer them a little bit later when we chat. But I want you guys to think about them. So verse 8, it says, their tongue is an arrow shot out. It speaketh deceit. One speaketh peaceably to his neighbors with his mouth, but in heart he lieth his weight. Literally saying, you hear one thing out of a person's mouth, but then what is actually happening in their heart is they're waiting for a vulnerable opportunity. And it is going right in line with what will I do for the daughter of my people? Because this is what's happening. When Jeremiah is saying, look, death and destruction are coming, Yah is not pleased with your ways. You have other people, and you'll see this later on, where the people who Jeremiah is talking about are eventually going to talk in the text. They're going to be a dialogue about what they say and how they're going to counter prophesy what Yah has told Jeremiah. And so literally Jeremiah is stating, he's like, their tongue is an arrow, and it's shot out and it speaks deceit. And he's saying, look, Yah is telling this to you. It's not me telling you. I'm not a hater. I'm telling you what Yah is saying so that you can be on guard. And he says, but their heart lieth in wait. And then Yah goes on to say, shall I not visit them for these things? This word visit literally arrested me. It arrested me because I guess when I think about visit, because English is my first language, I think about, especially when you think about Yah, it's like, should I not like do something about these things? Should I not, make something happen? In the text, in other places, it says, shall I not avenge them? But the Hebrew word here is pekad, pei, kof, dalet. And it's interesting because it's almost the opposite of what you want to happen during the season we're in. We're in the season of Pesach, right? So we want Yah to create an opening so we can turn away and worship him and be separate from our enemies. The idea of pekad is this idea of an opening and a visitation, but not just any visitation. It literally means to visit or to muster, but in a very, very literal sense, it literally means to show up. Do you want me to show up and look at this? He says, am I not supposed to look on this? But then what happens when Yah looks on dysfunction? It's almost that thing, and we've all experienced this, where if you're in a room and you and your sibling or you and your cousins or whomever, you're over grandma's house or Nana's house and you start fighting, and then they yell out, do you want me to come in? You'd be like, no. Everybody immediately gets it together, right? So it's literally Yah saying, shall I not visit them for these things? Oh, so y'all want me to show up. You want me to show up and deal with what you know you're not supposed to be doing? The question should be answered with a resounding, absolutely not. We will fix it. We will get it together, right? He says, shall I not visit them for these things? And then he says, shall not my soul be avenged on such a nation as this? I don't think we really understand the effects of our disobedience on Yah. We only see it one way. At the end of this, we're going to get into more of that, but I'm going to give you an example of the effects of, just the effects, it's not even a situation of necessarily disobedience, but the effect of death, in a sense, on Hamashiach. Does anybody remember the story where Hamashiach shows up to meet Eleazar, who the text now calls Lazarus, right? So technically he shows up to meet Lazarus, and he obviously comes, and it's his sisters, and there's a wailing people, and the environment and everything that was happening, of course, his deep love for his friends, right, moved Yehoshua to weep. Everybody's in other says Yeshua wept. And he's like, dang, those real emotions and those real feelings and those real things played out cannot be present unless those are things that are of and in Yah. If Messiah is supposed to be a physical living representation of how Yah feels about the people, about how he responds to the people, what his place is in the midst of the people, then also the emotions that Hamashiach shows towards certain things are indicative of how Yah feels when we're pained or when we're disobedient. So if Hamashiach goes into the temple and he then makes his switch, makes his whip, and he starts cleaning out the temple, and he expresses this anger for how they had chose to turn the temple into a den of thieves, we can go back and actually look in the text in what they call the Old Testament and see moments where Yah says, I was angered, or I was wroth with the people because, so you get it played out, and you get to see it in a physical human form. The same thing is true with the emotion. So when you have a people, specifically our people, unfortunately, who are disobedient, Yah also, and bear with me to the end of my thought, Yah also has to do certain things to protect his name, because the destruction and how things are happening are viewed as his fault by other people, right? Wasn't that what how Moses appealed to Yah? He said, oh, no, don't destroy this people, because then the other nations will look on and say, look how this Elohim did this. And that's going to be, not that Moses was actually convincing Yah out of anything, but in Moses' human mind, what Yah said, because he didn't understand what or how Yah was going to do it, seemed just absolutely horrific. And he was like, we don't want to experience that. In the same way, when you have a nation that's getting ready to be destroyed, it's not just any people, but it's a people who have literally been created in the likeness and image of Yah. So when he sees us, he sees himself. It's us, when we see ourselves, we don't see him. So then you're causing me to create affliction on something I love. And so what you'll see in the text is Yah is going to literally have to separate himself from identifying with Israel because of what they've chosen to do. And I told you it's interesting how things fall, because we're within the week of the sacrifice of Hamashiach and how all of that played out. And to see how Yah progressively, because of the people's sin, has to create a distinction and a separation between them. And he's literally telling them, if I remove myself, if I'm not here, then the nations are going to come and they're going to gather around and they're going to come in and spoil. They're going to sense the lifting of my presence, and you will become a prey. That was the previous chapters. You're literally going to see how that progresses as we move through this last part of the text. So he says, shall not my soul be avenged on such a nation as this? Like, I have to do something, because you are only supposed to operate for my name's sake. And now you have taken my name in vain. You have literally shamed me. Remember, it says, what does a husband do if a wife goes off? He goes through that whole thing. You know how your shame has affected how I'm viewed to the other nations, and I cannot let that go unpunished. I'm appealing to you to confess your sins, confess what you've done, so that you remove this disdain that you are trying to place on me by improperly connecting yourself to me, and also trying to connect me with other gods. That doesn't work for me. So am I just supposed to sit back and take this from you, or shall not my soul be avenged on such a nation as this? I think it's interesting here, because he doesn't say, shall my soul be avenged on my people? He calls them goy. It's a term that they use for non-Israelites, goyim. He calls them by a term that's like, you're just people. You're just a nation, not my nation, but this nation. The words and the terms of endearment have been pulled back, and now you're just goyim. You're acting like the other people, and you know how and what I've done to the other nations who have behaved like you have. So it goes on and says, for the mountains will take up a weeping and wailing. See, the people are too indignant to nahi and baki. That's the word, weeping and wailing. So the nahi, the wailing, is the word where we get lamentation. It's a crying that has a sound with it. It's not a gentle cry. It's a cry that comes down from the gut. And unfortunately, more of us have experienced this than I'm even comfortable with. But have you heard the cry of a mother who's lost a child? Have you heard the cry of a person who is in a situation where literally there seems like no way out, and it's gut-wrenching and it's blood-curdling? And if you were in the halls, or if you're in a room and you heard it, even if you didn't know what it was, it would arrest you and you would begin to weep as well. That is the word, that's a version of lamentation. It's a feeling that you feel inside of you that's because of the frequency that's within that particular type of cry. And then the idea of weeping is the word baki, and we've actually covered this word in the 1 Samuel series, where David, when he was walking up the mountains, it said he covered his head and he walked up barefooted and he wept. It's the idea that your eyes begin to well up with tears, and you know, before you get to this type of crying, that if I start crying, I don't know when I'm going to stop, because there's a fountain for this type of tears. There's a hole that's been dug because of grief and destruction and trauma. And if I tap into this, my eyes, as Jeremiah said in verse 1, will become a fountain of water and will literally begin to pour down. And I don't know when they'll stop. That's what he was saying. He said, but you see, the people don't have sense enough. So yeah, I said, the mountains will take up weeping and wailing. And for the habitations of the wilderness, a lamentation. The wilderness and the animals and the beasts will begin to wail. Because we talked about this in a few lessons ago, how our disobedience affects everything. We don't understand that yet, because I don't think we still understand who we are. Messiah even went as far as to echo it. He says, you know what? That's, the scriptures say, are you not gods? Are you not Elohim? Don't you have power? Yes, the power that you have in you, which was given to you by Elohim, is in you. And you literally, because of this, are affecting the whole environment. Your inability to stand on my word and do what I said is the reason why you see this. So people ask, and I know this is jacked up, but it's true. And we all have to embrace this. When people go, why do people die that shouldn't be dying? And why do these things happen? And people say, why would God allow? The reality should really be, what is Israel doing? And how is Israel not in position? Because if Israel was in position, and if Israel was being obedient, these things would not be taking place. We've been given dominion over everything in our obedience. So then it's our disobedience that literally causes the dysfunction in the world we see. It manifests in our physical world, in our physical homes, and in our physical environments. If you think I'm kidding, you're like, Hulda is off her rocker and she went too far. I got a cousin and his name is Yonah. And Yonah tried to get on a boat and go the opposite direction of where Yah told him to go. And Yah caused the whole sea to respond to his disobedience, so much so, that the people on the boat were like, what, this must be an act of that. We ain't never seen nothing like this. And Jonah was like, and then eventually when they started to unload, trying to save the ship, Jonah said, look, it's me. Like, what? Yeah, all this that's happening, this literal catastrophic calamity that you see in the natural environment is because of my spiritual disobedience. Yah told me to go to Nineveh, and I'm trying to go to Tarshish. So guess what? Throw me over. Just kill me is what he said. He still wasn't planning on going. And Yah was like, okay, I got something better for you. And then a large fish, a large whale, if you will, comes and swallows him up. And guess where he spits him out at? In Nineveh. So that's just one example of how the physical environment can be obedient to Yah and is literally witnessing and listening to what Yah says. That's why when our ancestors in the text would say, I call upon heaven and earth to witness. Why? Because the heavens, the Shamayim, and the trees and the ground, all of those things are recording what's happening. That's why nothing goes unseen and nothing goes unrecorded. Death and blood spilled out. The ground cries out and tells Yah who did it. It's literally like, I hate to use this movie because the last one was completely trash, but it's like Avatar. And at one point, Avatar, when they had to put on the skins, if you will, of the people who were native to the land, so that the land and the environment would not respond to them negatively, because they said that Pandora was living and it protected the people. Well, in the same way in this text, Israel, Canaan, this land that had been set apart and literally told to respond to the people, to flow, to flourish, to grow like Eden, right, was going to negatively respond to them because the land and everything natural takes its command from Yah. And everything in the environment is only on our side when we're on Yah's side. So Daniel can go into the lion's den and not get ate up because Yah can say, shut your mouth, because he's mine, he's obedient to me, and that's why he's in here. But in the same way, when the other men get thrown in, it said that their bones were crushed and they were eaten before they even got to the ground. The response is based upon the relationship with the Creator. So it says, and for the habitation of the wilderness, a lamentation, because they are burned up so that none can pass through them. Neither can men hear the voice of cattle. Both the fowl of the heavens and the beasts are fled and they are gone. If you don't know, if you haven't done this, because I was prompted to do this as I was going through this, go and look at the places where they're destitute. Think about Somalia. Think about the worst places in Ethiopia, or places where they show you famine. Think about Iraq and Iran and war-torn areas. You know, one of the things you don't see? You don't see a bunch of beautiful birds and flocks of birds and herds of natural animals. They're gone because the devastation that has come through the land has also displaced them. And so they also suffer, they also respond, they also flee, and they go other places. So that now when famine and things come, the animals have moved on. They got the memo long before, and then the people stayed. So then You have an environment that is an indication that the natural things felt and heard the call that the destruction was coming, but the humans who were supposed to be directly connected to the divine had no understanding or chose to refuse because of their own hardness of their hearts. Verse 11, he says, and I will make Jerusalem heaps and a den of dragons. So the idea of heaps and a den of dragons are like lizards. They're lizards that actually come out in the desert. So if you ever go to Tel Arad or like the actual desert places of Israel, they're everywhere. Like if you guys ever seen Holes, the movie Holes with the kids, and they were digging the holes and they had those giant like lizard things, those are all over the place in the ruins of Israel, especially in the desert ruins of Israel. So he's like, I'm going to literally make this place to be like that. And he said, I'll make the cities of Judah desolate without an inhabitant. So we see it, and it's interesting because we see it from afar off for many of us who have not gone to these like war-torn places. But have you looked at just recently, like Ukraine and other places where they're bombed? And you look at how the cities can go from literally say, this is what this looked like last month. This is what this looks like today. And if you would have asked the people a year ago, would they have thought that that place would have looked like that? The answer would have been absolutely not. Yah is literally giving them a picture of literally the cities that are populous, the cities where you have people coming and there's laughter and there's children playing in the streets. He's like, you see that. But because of your disobedience, I'm telling you that you're going to enter into a parallel and alternate universe so far away from anything you can conceive, and it's of your own creation. You are creating the reality that you're going to live in. I know you guys have probably heard this, but people say like, everything is what you make of it up here and in here. So I make a joke because, I mean, my kids, I know they go with me, and most people's kids went to the end of the earth. And I tell them, I say, hey, if me and my kids lived in a tent, they would think we were on like some kind of Crocodile Dundee adventure. They would never know any different, because it's all about how you frame that thing to them. It's all about the mindset and how you respond. In that same exact way, the mindset that Israel had taken on was framing literally what was coming to them. This is a perfect example. If you ever wanted to know the truth about the law of attraction, the law of attraction is an obedience and disobedience. Be obedient to Yah and see what your environment starts to look like. Be disobedient to Yah and see what your environment begins to look like. With this earthly form, you can manipulate situations and environments, but eventually they're only a facade. It looks good on here, but it's not good all the way through. With Yah, it's polar. When you're obedient, it flourishes. Literally everything, your mental health, your spiritual health, your physical health, everything begins to flourish. And when things are not well, they're an opportunity for us to learn something about ourselves, about Yah, and how he wants us to move. It's something that he's doing. But when we're disobedient and we begin to see calamity and we begin to see lack, that is also a creation of our own minds. And guess what? The more you begin to experience it, the more your mind begins to view everything negative. People who are tormented, everything is negative. People who are emotionally unstable, everything is negative. You go, why are you so crabby? I don't know. Or you could be walking through and somebody smiles at you. Why are they smiling at me? And it's like, it's a smile. Why are they looking at me like that? Maybe they think you're beautiful. Why they coming up to me? Maybe you see how you can, your attitude then can create an environment of desolation, even if that's not what everybody else is experiencing. So then Yah goes on to say, he literally says to them, he says, who is the wise man that may understand this? Because probably to many of us, when we read through Jeremiah, because most of us have before this point, did you read through this little passage of Jeremiah and Jeremiah 9 and went like, oh, because that was about destruction and that was about this? No, but when Yah adds wisdom and understanding, then there's the ability to see into things in the way that Yah saw them and Yah sees them. Insight is not just being able to manufacture something different. Insight is the ability to see what Yah sees and to give the replicated version in the time at which it's supposed to be applied. So he says, who is the wise man that may understand this? Chokmah. It's like, who is being trained and has their palate tuned to be able to ingest what I'm feeding you? Because see, this type of meal to the obstinate is it touches my mouth and I don't want to taste it. I don't want to ingest this. But to the wise, we understand that all food we have to eat is not going to be good for us, but it's going to be beneficial because our bodies need the wisdom and the understanding, the nutrition and the vitamins so that we can carry out a particular task. He's like, do you want to understand this so that you can know how to navigate through times like this? And he says, and who is he to whom, here you go, the mouth of Yah has spoken? So literally, I was like, I'm trying to talk to you from my own mouth, that he may declare it. It's not something that Yah is just saying. He's like, you need to know it so that you can declare this thing. It needs to be known so it can be declared. For what the land perisheth and is burned up like a wilderness that none passeth through. He's like, can you even conceive this about this place? He says, and Yah saith, because, and I love this about Yah, because the question is why? Like, why is Yah popping off in such a way against his people? And he says, because they have forsaken my law, which I have set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, neither walked therein. I'm going to stop at the semicolon because we're going to pick up the second part. But I wrote down a question. And we look at all this, and he's doing the mountains are weeping and wailing and all this. And he says, why? Because they have forsaken my law, which I have set before them. So there's another place to put in your arsenal about, is it Moses' law or is it Yah's law? Well, it's Yah's law. And he says, and I set it before them. And he says, and they have not obeyed my voice, neither walk therein. He said, because some people may have heard me, but clearly they didn't show that they heard me, because the response to hearing is doing. He's like, So my question, or the comment I wrote down to myself, I said, if he will do this, maybe his law is important. Because why would he go through such great lengths for something that was just temporary? Why would he cause the mountains to weep and wail, and for the beast of the field and all these things to flee, and for destruction to come, and this great appeal, knowing that eventually you go, actually, that law doesn't even matter? Would not the people of Judah and Jerusalem, and would not our ancestors have a great accusation against the living Elohim if he did all this for something that he was going to say, just kidding, that don't matter anymore, it's all done away with? Why would he have not done it for them then, and he's doing it for you now, and we are much worse and much further off than they could ever have conceived to be? Literally, heaven and earth would have a great occasion, an accusation against Yah, if he was just playing, or if he was just temporarily in I'm just kind of enamored with this whole law thing right now. But eventually, like, I'm going to reinvent myself, and I'm going to make like a God 2.0. And then this version of myself, like, he's just going to be like, it's no big deal. I got it. You're trying to tell me that the Yah who led them out of Egypt didn't have it, if it was to be halved, if that's even a word. How could the Elohim, whose arm was mighty and lacked no strength, have the power to subdue Pharaoh and his army and part seas and give them manna for 40 years and 40 years every day, double on the Shabbat, without missing a meal? And when they complained, gave him manna, made water sweet, but he couldn't somehow just have, applied this little part that says that this is really not that serious. Like, at all these times, he was just into like killing people for fun. When we begin to have thoughts, we need to think our thoughts out. It's called metacognition. That's the term for it. It's to think about what you're thinking. You thought something and you said it, but you didn't think about what you were thinking. Because if you thought about what you were thinking before you said it, you probably wouldn't have said that thought. Nobody would say, Yah somehow was just, trying to see if these people were tough enough to take it. And now it doesn't apply to you. When literally his appeal is based upon them not listening, not following. But then they go on to do this. He says, but they didn't follow me. They didn't listen. But they have walked after the imagination of their own heart and after baalim. Hear this part right here, which their fathers taught them. How about that? He goes, yeah, it wasn't that you just didn't want to hear me. We've had this conversation before in this Jeremiah series, but you didn't walk in my ways, but then you did, halak, you did go on a path toward your own imagination. I love this word because when it jumped out to me, I was like, ooh, that's scary. It's very scary. The word here is this idea of stubbornness and hard-heartedness. So we don't see stubbornness and hard-heartedness as imagination. That's why I'm such a big pusher of defining things, because imagination is like something you've made up. It's a fairy tale. But this stubbornness and this firmly closed and tight shut narrow-mindedness toward your own will, towards your own authority within, see, that's different. That's making yourself Yah. Where Yah can say something, that ain't how I see it. Because that's literally what they were saying. They were like, yeah, Jeremiah, we hear what you're saying, but that ain't what we see. And he's like, but yeah, I was like, but I made him the seer. That's the way it's supposed to be seen, because your heart is not a position where I can even talk to you. So I have to talk from without. And if you think that to be strange, I love this book for this reason. If you think that to be strange, you're like, what? No way. They weren't like, yeah, we don't want to hear it. You have to talk to us afar off. Well, they did say that, if you guys didn't know, but Jeremiah, and I meant to mention this at the beginning. See, Jeremiah has a text for his message. His message has a text. Not only is Yah actually interjecting and speaking through Jeremiah, but Jeremiah has a text for his message. It's Deuteronomy chapter 28 and 29, by the way, and a little bit of Deuteronomy 4, and a little bit of Judges, because they lived through that. But remember, they had Torah, and they had some of the writings from other prophets, but they had Torah. So specifically, his message is from Deuteronomy, and then he had the writings, right? Because David's writings, they were given to the priests so that they could sing songs. So we're going to go into a little bit of Psalm 81 as well. So let's hear about what happened when they walked after the imaginations of their own hearts, after baalim. I'm going to define that because there is some misinformation about definitions. And it's not that the heart is not good. It's just that whenever you define something wrong, you create like another space-time continuum that we're gonna have to correct. And then he says, after baalim, which their fathers taught them. So let me do with that baalim part. The word for baal means owner. That's the closest English equivalent. This idea of Lord is from the King James period, where you had Lord, dukes, and so forth and so on. The idea of Lord would not have been a concept that would have been within the construct of the minds of people there. When they saw Baal, they saw a owner, somebody that owned something. So this idea that if you say, now I believe this, that in modern time, this can be applied, but in this time you can't say, every time you see Baal, it's like saying Lord, like how they say Lord God. It's not true. Whenever you see Baal, it's talking about owner. And he says they followed after owners. Their parents literally gave them into bondage to other owners, to other Elohim, to other powers, and taught them how to serve other owners. And I am their maker and their creator. See how that's different than saying like they serve the Lord. And then you try to make like a a false version that people created of God, and then a real version kind of clash. He's like, no, no, no. How about this? We still do. And we got a lot of owners. We have a lot of things that through trauma and through parenting that we have been placed into bondage to, that we are required to purge from, whatever it is, whether it's poor mental practices, poor eating habits, poor shopping habits, poor spending habits, debt. These are owners that your parents have taught you. And when it comes to gods, right, because the gods behind a lot of things, like we have mammon, Yah literally mentions the gods of things, because when you go into constructs, you are then going into the god or into the owner that governs that particular realm. Makes sense? Very much like the Greek mind in this way, where they had like a god for everything, right? So you had the god of love. So then the owner of your heart, when you're trying to get this romantic love and you want people to buy you gifts, and that comes from the ownership of Cupid. See how you can say like, that's a owner, that's a baalim, that is a pillar set up for worship, right? A owner, you've been put into the hands of the owner, Ashtaroth, the Ishtar. When you give your kid eggs and a basket and Easter, you now gave your child over, and now they are owned until they are redeemed through Torah, through understanding the false practice, being redeemed back to Yah. They are now have hooks in them so that when that owner calls them, they respond. Yah said, your fathers taught you that. So if you think Yah's just being away, we're going to do, I'm going to do some reading. Let's go to let's start with Deuteronomy 4. I think I wrote this down somewhere else too. So if we come back to it twice, just forgive me. So Deuteronomy 4. Oh, it's not going to let me play like that. All right. And we're going to go from verse 4 to 27 to 40. But I'm actually going to just double back just a little bit. I'm going to actually jump forward. Let's go to Deuteronomy 29:19 first, so that we could just get a literally just look at this verse. All right. So we're going to go Deuteronomy 29. And he says, and it came to pass, and it come to pass. Oh, I got to go back. I'm sorry. Let's just mosey on back and go to verse 1, because why not? All right. So literally, Jeremiah is going to mention, so I'm kind of jumping ahead. He's going to mention wormwood and gall. Don't let these two things, it's like a ding, ding, ding. Keep this in your mind. Wormwood and gall. And he's going to talk about what their fathers have taught them and what they have learned and how they serve baalim. Just keep that in your mind. These are the words of the covenant which Yah commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, beside the covenant which he made with them in Horeb. Okay, Yah commanded it. And Moses called unto all Israel and said unto them, ye have seen all that Yah did before your eyes in the land of Egypt unto Pharaoh, and unto all his servants, and unto all his land. The great temptations which your eyes have seen, the signs, and those great miracles. Yet Yah hath not given you an heart to perceive, and eyes to see, and ears to hear unto this day. And I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes are not waxen old upon you, and your shoe is not waxen old upon your foot. You have not eaten bread, neither have you drunk wine or strong drink, that you may know I am Yah your Elohim. Very interesting, very interesting. And when ye came unto this place, Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, came out against us unto battle, and we smote them. And we took their land and gave it for an inheritance unto the Reubenites and unto the Gadites and unto the half tribe of Manasseh. He's running it down, like down, down. Keep therefore the word of this covenant and do them, that ye may prosper in all you do. He showed them the prosperity. You see how when y'all was behaving like this, how it worked? He says, verse 10, yea, stand this day, all of you, before Yah your Elohim, your captains of your tribes, your elders, and your officers, with all the men of Israel, your little ones, your wives, and the stranger that is in your camp, from the hewer of the wood unto the drawer of the water, that thou shouldest enter into covenant with Yah your Elohim, and into his oath which Yah your Elohim maketh with you this day, that he may establish you today for a people unto himself, and that he may be unto thee an Elohim, as he hath said unto you, and as he has sworn unto your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Neither, this is one of my favorite verses in the whole scripture, neither with you only do I make this covenant and this oath, but with him, with the person that standeth here with us this day before Yah your Elohim, and also with the one that is not here with us this day. For ye know how we have dwelt in the land of Egypt, and how we came through the nations which we passed by, and ye have seen their abominations and their idols, wood and stone, silver and gold, which were among them. Lest there be among you man or woman, family or tribe, whose heart turn away this day from Yah Elohim to go and serve the gods of these nations, lest there be among you a root, how about that bear gall and wormwood. And it come to pass, when he heareth the words of this curse, this wicked person, that he bless himself in his heart, saying, I shall have peace. Though I walk in the imagination of mine heart to add drunkenness to thirst, Yah will not spare him, but then the anger of Yah and his jealousy shall smote against that man, and all the curses that are written in this book shall lie upon him, and Yah shall blot out his name from under Shamayim. And Yah shall separate him into the evil of all the tribes of Israel, according to all the curses of the covenant that are written in this book of the law, so that the generation to come of your children that shall rise up after you, and the stranger that shall come from a far land shall say, when they see the plagues of that land and the sickness which Yah hath laid upon it, and that the whole land thereof is brimstone, salt, and burning, that is not sown, nor beareth, nor any grass groweth there, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which Yah overthrew in his anger and in his wrath, even all nations shall say, wherefore hath Yah done this unto this land? What meaneth the heat of this great anger? Then men shall say, because they have forsaken the covenant of Yah, Elohim of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them forth out of the land of Egypt. For they went and served other Elohim and worshiped them, Elohim whom they knew not and whom he had not given unto them. And the anger of Yah was kindled against this land to bring upon it all the curses that are written in this book. And Yah rooted them out of their land in anger and in wrath and in great indignation, and cast them into another land, as it is this day. The secret things, I love how this ends, belong unto Yah Elohim. But those things that he's showing you, he said, who has wisdom to understand? But those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever. Why? That we may do all the words of this law. Jeremiah got his sermon from a sermon. He got his message from Torah. He literally got his message from Torah. And just to sum it up, I don't have to say anything. I'm not ever going to comment after it's laid down so simply. Let's just go to Psalm 81 and 12. And this is another verse talking about the people's hearts. And guess who also perceived it? David. It says, so I gave them up unto their own heart's lust, and they walked in their own counsels. Nobody can ever say, looking through the text, that Yah did something to somebody that they didn't know was going to happen. Literally, when we get into Jeremiah, and we're right here in chapter 9, down by verse 15, and he's saying, verse 14, he says, but have walked after the imagination of their own heart. These things, when they're said, when we read the scripture, they should ring a bell in our head. So for instance, let me use something that most people of African-American descent who live in the Western world, who are about my age or a little bit older, will know. If I said smoking, everybody would immediately, if you've seen the movie, you know the scene immediately, you know who popped in your head, you know the character, you know which movie it was, whether it was 1, 2, you immediately are spot on with what it is, right? Immediately. That is how our minds were conditioned when we were raised, when our ancestors were raised in Torah, where a person would only have to say the imagination of their own heart, and literally it would have jumped back to Deuteronomy. Because like we have movies that we watch and rehearse, they watched and rehearsed. So we're supposed to watch and rehearse Torah. So when certain things came up, you knew by a very small reference without having to say, oh, that's in Deuteronomy chapter 29, because that didn't exist for them in that way. Verses and all that stuff, that's new stuff. They knew based upon what Yah had said. They knew what Torah said about them and the imaginations of their hearts. So check this out. Jeremiah 15, just because he's going to just keep going through that Deuteronomy 29 portion. Therefore, thus saith Yah of hosts, the Elohim of Israel. So he's saying, thus saith Yah, and we can confirm what the prophet says because the prophet is speaking according to the law. Behold, I will feed them, even this people, with wormwood and give them gall to drink. That's straight out of Deuteronomy chapter 29. So if Yah says it, he may say it because the idea of the prophet is to apply Torah to the time, the present time they live in. So the wording may be slightly different. Remember, he said this particular person will have gall. You know, he's applying that same exact thing, saying, you all are going to be drinking gall and wormwood because you are going to understand two things. One, that you're full of parasites. You're full of unclean things. The wormwood was actually used as a parasitic. It also, in high capacities, is poisonous. So it's a poison that you introduce in the body in a small form that's supposed to get the parasites out. Then the idea of gall is another type of poison that would be given. And both of these poisons are given because of the condition of the body of the people. I'm going to give you the poison that you self-created. You made yourself sick by doing these spiritual practices. So this gall and this wormwood, this bitter drink, you're going to get a dose of your own medicine, is how we would say it in modern terms. He's like, I'm going to give you to drink what you are embodying, literally going directly back to that Deuteronomy 29. Why? Because you have profaned my name. And when people come through this land, watch this verse 16. He says, actually, I'm going to go back. Go back just a little bit, because I think, and I don't want to fly over this idea of which their fathers taught them. It's another kind of lengthy read, it's about 12 verses. But we're going to read through it because I don't think that we have considered how long this particular behavior was going on. And we get into this idea of trauma and epigenetic sin and transgenerational sin. He's like, you are behaving in a very dysfunctional way, but you're behaving this way because you picked up the practices of your forefathers. And you're like, how? How could this happen? Well, if you remember how the books go, it goes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and it goes Joshua, Judges, right? 7 books in, quite a bit of history, but 7 books in, at the time of the judges, so they had gotten into the land, we're going to read about what their behavior was, because not much has changed. We've had periods, but not much has changed in their behaviors, because these practices, not Torah, but these practices were being taught to them. The Hebrew word for taught, or the instruction, is lamad, and it literally means instruction for practical use. They were living like this and trying to add to it going to church. That's something that we can all understand. So have you ever been in a home where a person lives one way, but when they go to fellowship, or when they would go to church, if don't have anybody who fellowship with you now, when they would go to church, they're a completely different version of the person? It's not the church version that the family emulated. It was the at-home version. So then when you see the nice, sweet old grandma who come in her white and she on the usher board, but then all of her kids is on crack and drug dealers, That is not evidence of home. The environment, maybe not their physical home, but the environment or whatever was going around bred that. Old people say they didn't suck it out of their thumb. Like, it's the reality that something in the practice, in the presence of the person, did not translate. So you've given one thing when you go amongst other righteous people, and then you're giving something else at home. Many of us have been guilty of this. You give one thing when you show up for Pesach and Sukkot and the feast days. But my mom says this, and I'm sure other older people do too, your children tell on you. I've been at feasts where I'm like, is that pork? Oh yeah, he not ready to transit. And he live in your house? Like, whoa, okay. I know not of that type of parenting, but okay. Because what you're doing here is not happening there. The law that you will live under here, you're not implementing there. See that difference? So this idea of teaching is instruction for practical use. Practicality is what you see done around you on a day-to-day basis, not the outlier offshoot things. So if you're a mean person, but you're nice to one person, your children are going to be mean unless you have some work of Yah or they have another influence. They're going to be who you are the majority of the time, not who you are some of the time. That's just how it is. They're going to take on that particular disposition. It's just what it is. So he's saying you taught them this because you serve Baal way more than you serve me. Put in simple words. If you do the history and you do your track record, you serve Baal more than you serve me. So if you think I'm lying or I'm being a hater, just go to Judges. Judges, and we're going to do chapter 2. We don't get too far into it. All right, and we'll go down to verse 11. Okay, let's just do 10. And also that generation were gathered unto their fathers, so the generation before, another generation after them, peep this. I got to go back to verse 1 because some of y'all probably haven't read this before. So I'm just going to go back to verse 1. So bear with me for the reading. And an angel of Yah came from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I made you to go out of Egypt and have brought you into the land, which I swear, like Yah is constantly reminding him of his character. Swear unto your fathers, and I say, I will never break my covenant with you, and ye shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. You shall throw down their altars. Like Yah is so serious about these pagan gods and these stuff. But ye have not obeyed my voice. And he goes like this. Why have you done this? Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall be as thorns in your side, and their Elohim shall be a snare unto you. Because you got these trauma hooks. And it shall come to pass when the angel of Yah spoke these words unto all the children that the people lifted up their voice and they wept. And they called that name, the name of that place, Bochim, and they sacrificed there unto Yah. So look how their heart was a little different. When he calls them out, very short little passage, calls them out, and they just weep. They're like broken, like, oh my gosh. We're in Jeremiah 9. Jeremiah's been preaching for 9 chapters, multiple months or probably a year or more. And still the people haven't done this. One little passage, the angel of Yah shows up, and y'all tripping. And he says, and they did what? They wailed, they lamented, and they began crying. Let's check this out. And when Joshua had let the people go, the children of Israel went every man into his inheritance to possess the land. And the people served Yah all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua. So, oh my gosh, people can actually serve Yah, who had seen the great works of Yah that he did in Israel. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of Yah, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in the border of the inheritance, which is Timoth Harez, in the mount of Ephraim on the north side of the hill of Gaash. And also, all that generation were gathered unto their fathers, and there rose another generation after them. Check this out, which knew not Yah, nor yet the works he had done for Israel. How you get a generation of people who knew the works, raise up a generation, one generation later, who don't know anything? Well, It's because they didn't teach them. They knew, but they didn't teach them. And the children of Israel did evil, dysfunctional in the sight of Yah, and served, here it is, baalim. This is in Judges. We're all the way in Jeremiah. That means that Saul, Samuel, David, all these things have happened. Like all these things have happened. Jeremiah is like way on this side. So this is before David even got on the scene. And Jeremiah is talking about this very same thing way hundreds of years after. And they forsook Yah, Elohim of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other Els, and the God of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves to them, and provoked the anger of Yah. And they forsook Yah and served Baal and Ashtaroth. So when people are like, I'm not serving Baal, this is not what this is. It's like, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. It's just old stuff microwaved and then like reserved. All the nutrition is gone, but it's still there. It's that thing. Says, serving Baal and Ashtaroth, and the anger of Yah was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of spoilers that spoiled them. And he sold them into the hands of their enemies round about. Same prescription, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. Whithersoever they came out, the hand of Yah was against them for evil, as Yah had said. So when he says, as Yah said, you're supposed to know that he said, and my hand will be against thee for evil continually. That's Deuteronomy 28, right? As Yah has said. And as Yah had sworn to them that they were greatly distressed. Nevertheless, Yah raised up judges, which delivered them out of the hands of those that spoiled them. And yet they would not hearken unto their judges, but they went a-whoring after other Els and bowed themselves unto them. And they turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandments of Yah, but they did not so. And when Yah raised them up judges, then Yah was with the judge and delivered them out of the hands of their enemies all the days of the judge. For it repented Yah because of their groanings by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. Remember that? And it came to pass, so Yah is affected, right, by what happens to us. So then he sends a judge and they come. So it came to pass when the judge was dead, they returned again and corrupted themselves more than their fathers, and following other Els to serve them and to bow down unto them. They ceased not from their doings, nor from their stubborn way. And the anger of Yah was hot against Israel. And he said, because if this people hath transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and have not hearkened unto my voice, I also will not henceforth drive out any from before them of the nations which Joshua left when he died, that through them I may prove Israel whether they will keep the way of Yah to walk therein, as their fathers did keep, or not. Therefore Yah left those nations without driving them out hastily, neither delivered he them into the hand of Joshua. Now you see, one, why the Baalim and Ashtaroth are still around, because Israel kept them around by continuing to worship them. So you're like, why wouldn't Yah just get rid of them? He told them to. He raised up judges. He said, you guys love this. So then it became a proving point. So we told you a couple of things from this present time will come in. Every time we get to a point where these worldly feasts come up, it's a proving point. You can literally say, I wouldn't tell a person this because, I don't be in other people's business. I'm drinking my water, my own business at this point. But when a person goes after all year long, after all Yah's done for them, and then they put a little Easter basket and peeps, which are actually a carcinogen, if anybody didn't know that, the little peep things, they are literally a known carcinogen. They literally cause cancer. All that candy and stuff in that basket is deadly. They go and then they literally go and worship those things. It's like, you don't love Yah. You're like, that's mean. Hold on. Yah said. So if these things are amongst them and they're professing to love me, and then literally, Ashtoreth shows up with her eggs and all of her sexual or orgiac influence, and they go, okay, this is just one day we're going to just do this. You are the same as your forefathers. And he said, I've left them here to prove you. That's why I'm not mad at anybody who gets angry with righteous anger at, the stuff that the world does. But it's not even worth my time in focusing on it in the sense of adding my anger to it. Guess what? Because Yah said he's not moving it. He's not getting rid of those things. They are not going to cease to be here because they are a proving ground for people. So being like, I wish I just didn't see no more Christmas trees. You're going to see them because they are showing who is with Yah and who isn't. You can literally just peep it. Because I've had people who rock with me all year. They'd be at the feast days and everything. And then Christmas show up and I'm like, what? Oh, we ain't cool no more. I mean, we cool, but we ain't cool like that. Like me and you not the same. It's a proving ground because when that music starts or when they start doing certain things, people immediately become attracted to it. Yah said, I did that on purpose. I'm showing you that this transgenerational epigenetic trauma from way back here, these hooks are still in them because they haven't purged their hearts. Literally says it. And the question is, we look at them, but then I have to ask the question, what imagination or idols have we invented of our own that don't necessarily fit into that category? What owners and baalim do we continue to go back to? And Yah says, I'm not removing that thing. I'm not removing that person. I'm not removing that whomever. You are going to show you love me by how you behave in the midst of that. I'm not moving it. Not killing them off. I'm not making them move across the country. Are you going to continue to follow them and to allow them to disrupt your life? Or are you going to follow me? We all have the exact same choices. All right. Let's keep going, Jeremiah. So he says he's going to feed them gall. And he says, I will scatter them among the heathen whom neither they nor their forefathers have known. You guys know that verse like the back of your hand. And I will send a sword after them till I have consumed them. You guys know that too. Thus saith Yah of hosts, consider ye and call for the mourning women. We finally got there. Told you this part's gonna go fast. The mourning women that they may come, and send for cunning women that they may come, and let them make haste and take up a wailing for us, that our eyes may run down with tears and our eyelids gush with waters. For a voice of wailing is heard out of Zion. How are we spoiled? There is a psychology, if you guys don't know, attached to crying. Something that we don't like to do. And unfortunately, because of our traumas, we cry when we're angry, but we don't cry for all the right reasons. And what happened during this time, we talked about a little bit at the beginning, is that the people were so far removed from their sin, and they were so caught up in what they were doing that they became numb. Earlier on, we looked at when the angel of Yah came and spoke, the people wept and they immediately cried. But this was completely different. Back in the day, our ancestors used to sing songs like this. Soon one morning, death come creeping in my room. Soon one morning, death come creeping in my room. Soon one morning, death come creeping in my room. These songs were attached to funeral rituals. When funerals would come, you had people who sang songs. We still do it today. But we've tried to lighten, I guess, the blow of death by not dealing with the reality of death, which is, it is a evidential experience for every person. That's just what it is. And back in the day, what would happen was the mourning attached to death would also cause a weeping, wailing, but also a rejuvenation and often a recommitment to living a more aligned lifestyle with the Creator. That's what used to be experienced amongst our people. Can't say that for everybody. So the idea of wailing women, it's kind of cool, was a profession. These were women who were professional wailers. A lot of us have grandmothers who are like leftovers, who like to just go to everybody's funeral. I have a grandmother who literally goes to the funeral home and looks at the list and be like, I'm gonna go to that funeral because I think I know her cousin. I am not of the wailing woman profession. I do not like, not that anybody does. I don't like going to people's funerals, even if I know you. I'm like, it's just not, I don't like the environment, but specifically because it hits so many deep emotional places that if you're not prepared to deal with those places, it can leave you in a rather shamble place. So in the ancient Near East, wailing women were professionals, and it was passed down from woman to woman, and then from woman to young woman, and then from woman to child. You were taught how to wail, and it was a praised profession within the community, because the men were the ones who often called for the wailing women. I think it's interesting because men often have a hard time tapping into the emotion at the level that the wailing women would then provide. So much so, going back to my reference earlier, that when Hamashiach walks up, shows the power of the wailing women, even him knowing that he is the resurrection and he came to raise up Lazarus, the emotion that was felt in the space even provoked him to weep because of the pain that the other people felt. So you understand it's a very, very, very powerful thing. So then Jeremiah is instructed to call on skilled, that's the word for cunning, not cunning like the adversary, skilled women who are trained in this wailing. In my mind's eye, I think it's very interesting. I've constructed that to be a wailing woman, you had to rehearse that which you wailed. So you had to be rehearsing deep emotional depth and singing songs with these women on a regular basis so that you would be in sync, in unison, because it was the unity of the wailing women that evoked the emotional response. A lot of times people look at the scripture and they gloss over things because in our minds we view them as primitive. But this would be definitely one of those primitive things where you have people literally crying to evoke tears for other people. Most people would see that, definitely the European would, as a ritualistic environment. And it's very much a tribal-based setting where you get into circles or into groups of healing or into gatherings or into houses or into huts where then this emotion is then gathered into one space. But because the houses were so corrupt, literally Jeremiah is called to have them come and wail in the streets. And our only real connection with that probably in this modern time is what we see when you see like Ferguson or people slain, where people go out and march and you get this like, it creates this real swelling group effect where you have these deep emotions, people standing out there, and it compels you to join in on a cause that may have not even affected you directly, but you want to support that cause. This calling of the wailing women was literally a pre-funeral because of the death that was getting ready to come. They were getting a prophetic expression of what was happening because Yah knew they were not changing. So it was literally in the prophetic perfect, which means that we're going to perform like it already happened because they're not going to do anything about their condition. These women were paid to perform at public funerals or rituals, and were also considered a form of grief counseling. What happens with grief is that it's hard to release grief. And so what Yah wanted them to do was to grieve their ways, to be open to changing and reconstructing. The women in this office were literally considered wise women and skilled women, and they were learned in their craft. The reality and the necessity of them was because trauma, and even your own trauma, even your own self-created things. For instance, let's say you enjoyed promiscuity, but then eventually you become numb to sexual exchange because I've just slept with so many people. You can, by your own pleasure, create an unpleasurable lifestyle. And what Israel didn't know was by their own engagement in spiritual harlotry and spiritual idolatry, they had become numb and were unable to hear and see the danger that was coming. So trauma can often leave people numb, confused, and unable to express their emotions by means of a combination of tears and well-chosen words and metaphors. They were able to fulfill and effectively reactivate cognitive function. And wailing women help people break through their silence by a basic and often raw vocalization of grief. Teach me how to cry. Teach me how to do that. We learn to sing and we learn all the good stuff, but we need to learn how to grieve and how to cry and how to release to make room for healing. And so the women, it's funny because in my sanctified imagination, I quite believe that Jeremiah probably through the provocation of the Ruach was called on to write the lamentation. I only say that because of the whole book called Lamentation, which means that they didn't just cry once. This wasn't something that was just done at one time. They may have cried about things over and over again. But in this particular sense, he says, and let them make haste and take up wailing for us. Why? So that our eyes can run down with tears and our eyelids gush out with waters. For a voice of wailing is heard out of Zion. How are we spoiled? We are greatly confounded because we have forsaken the land, because our dwellings have cast us out. This is what they're wailing. So in between crying, they're yelling and wailing these words. Yet hear the word of Yah, O ye women, and let your ear. So he's now talking to the women, because see, the women are, in this sense, trying to lead the emotional restoration of the men. Does that sound familiar? He says, but you got to hear my words. You can't do it in your own words. You have to hear what should cause you to weep. And unfortunately, a lot of us are so traumatized that our tears are seen as a vulnerability instead of a ministry. And so we don't want to cry in front of people. And we don't want to cry in front of our men because we don't want to be seen as weak, when by design, we were created to be the weaker vessel. It is the tears of the women and the children that even in war will evoke the most trained soldier to reject his orders and try to respond. Literally, they have military practices where they play wailing and weeping and teach the soldiers not to respond to the enemy women because they can lead their platoon into ambush. Because genetically, the men are supposed to be in tune to that sound, and that is why they are created, to respond and to protect. So maybe, just maybe, Yah is saying by the crying and the wailing, it will cause the men to respond to their ways and what they're allowing in their households and how they're allowing their wives to override Yah's law and practice and do these things and make them stand strong, because what is going to happen because of their disobedience, that man won't even be able to protect his own household from. He will want to respond and be powerless. That should bring up Deuteronomy 28 specifically for our experience in the diaspora, when our men wanted to save their wives and daughters from being raped by the master. They couldn't do anything because they were found powerless, but it's directly connected to their inability to be provoked and moved back to a space of reconciliation with Yah and his law. So then you have to witness that. But then it becomes additionally traumatic when you now don't know the connection between your experience and why you're experiencing it. So you feel like the whole world's against you, which makes for a very, very wrathful group of people. So it says, O ye women, hear the word of Yah, and let your ear receive, not just hear, but receive the word of his mouth, and teach your daughters wailing. Teach your daughters to be emotionally, spiritually connected and in tune, not just for a service, but so that they are sensitive enough to express the emotions that are evoked or brought up in them in a space. Because unfortunately, a lot of times in our homes, when us as parents, or even when we lived in homes as children, we would feel the emotional dysfunction and the physical dysfunction in the space, but we wouldn't cry, or we were told not to cry about it, because our crying made our parents, or makes us, feel some way about the environment in which we're choosing to cultivate and raise these children. And if our children were allowed to walk around crying, or if we were allowed to walk around crying because of the stress we felt in these spaces, it would have compelled the people in those spaces to change. But instead, we learn to become hard, and we bottle up our emotions. And then when we move on, we do those same things in other households, replicating this pent-up frustration and dysfunction. So Yah saying, teach your daughters to cry when things are worth crying about. Cry. and everyone her neighbor lamentation. Why? In this case, for death has come up into our windows and is entered into our palaces, to cut off the children from without and the young men from the streets. I told you we would go back and look at something that was directly connected to Messiah. And I think this is a really good place to jump into that, because this thing is gonna wrap up really quickly. This part where it says, for death has come into our windows and into our places. As we've gone through the Passover, we've reflected on the work of Hamashiach and what that was. And the closer and the more we get to an understanding of Torah, the more these pictures are going to become less, become less foreign to us, and they'll begin to make sense. So if you haven't thought about it already, when Messiah was carrying his stake toward what they call the crucifixion in the text, do you guys remember when the women wailed behind him? It was a funeral procession. So Jeremiah is calling on a funeral procession like one that we all are familiar with, which is obviously the one where Messiah is going to be hung. So we have Luke 23:27. And we're going to look at what what Yahushua's response is in connection with Yah's response to the women wailing and why they should be wailing. So verse 27 says, and there followed him a great company. Well, we can go back like one verse. Says, as they led him away, they laid upon one Simon, a Cyrene coming out of the country, and on him they laid the stake that he might bear it after Yeshua. And there followed him a great company of people and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him. But Yeshua, after all this beating, all this stuff, he turned to them and said, daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. Literally what Yah said in Jeremiah, by the way. For behold, the days are coming in which they shall say, blessed are the barren and the wombs that never bear, and the paps which never gave suck, the paps or breasts. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? So literally says the progression, we see the progression. He says, if they behave like that to me, what are they going to do to you? Which means that the hatred and the wickedness that was found in the hearts of the people never diminish, all the way to literally the killing of Hamashiach. And he says, and they're going to do the same thing to you. What Messiah says in this verse also is not the first time that this is mentioned, by no stretch of the imagination, but it's also mentioned in the book of Revelation. This verse is directly connected to Hosea. It says that when Yah comes, they'll see his face and they'll go, oh, hide us from the Lamb. Let the rocks fall on us. He was prophesying that this is what you see right now. Don't trip. I'll be back. This is not the end of this particular story. But when you see Yah of hosts coming in his full glory, to literally visit upon the people, to show up, shall I just let this go? Absolutely, I will not. He not only will he not let it go, but he's going to come. And when he comes, he's going to do so as the Lamb who has wrath. And so it was the same visitation that was prophesied in Jeremiah. They saw a glimpse of it with the Babylonians coming. But then Messiah is like, oh, and then in the last days, because the people's heart have not changed and the prescription doesn't change, Torah applies to every single generation and judges them according to their deeds, all the way to the end, all the way to the end. So he says, for death has come into our windows and has entered into our palaces to cut off the children from without and the young men from the streets. Speak thus, saith Yah. And this is going, you'll see how that parallels all the way back to what Jeremiah is saying. Even the carcasses of men shall fall as dung upon the open field, and as the handful after the harvestmen, none shall gather them. Thus saith Yah, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might. Let not the rich man glory in his riches. None of these things are going to save you. But let him that glory in this, that he understands and knoweth Yah. He says, knoweth me, that I am Yah. And check this part, which exercises loving kindness. He says, I was mindful of you. I considered you. Judgment, shafet, the idea that I waited and saw the whole end of the matter. I didn't judge too soon. This has been going on from the time of the judges till now. And righteousness in the earth. This is what I require. I exercise it, and that's what I require of you. You should strive after me and after my ways. For in these things I delight, saith Yah. If you ever want to know how to please Yah, he says, I delight in these things. So these are a few things we should all be cultivating. Verse 25, behold, the days come, saith Yah, this part right here, that I will punish them which are circumcised with the uncircumcised. What? But I thought it was about the circumcision. Isn't that what it was all about? He's like, I'm going to punish the circumcised with the uncircumcised. Egypt and Judah and Edom and the children of Ammon and Moab and all that are in the utmost corners that dwell in the wilderness. For all these nations are uncircumcised, and the house of Israel are uncircumcised in the heart. So you're the same to me.